Awesome. All right. So the structure of the session is going to be first, we will have some prepared questions for the panelists. And then we will open out the floor to all of you guys so you can ask any questions that you may have. And near the end, for about 15 to 20 minutes, we're planning to have breakout sessions where you all can have a conversation on a topic that is chosen through a poll. So I would like to remind you guys to just go to the Pathable platform. And if you click on the poll tab of this event, you will see a question asking you which topic you would most like to have a conversation on, and the winner will be the topic for our discussion. So just take a minute to do that. All right, while you guys do that, I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce each other just for about 30 seconds, your guys' name, what company you're working for, and anything else you might want to add in there. And also, just as an icebreaker, maybe answer the question, what made you smile recently? So we'll start off with Kaylee.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kaylee Crockett. My pronouns are she, they, or really anything that makes it so we can connect. I'm a lean management and leadership coach at Discover Financial Services. I'm currently working at our Phoenix, Arizona office. It's still really hot out here. What made me smile recently? I think I'm really working on living in the moment and without boundaries. And last night I went to my barbershop so I could feel real fresh for y'all, and had a little dance off with my barber and another client in the shop. It definitely made everybody in the shop smile, and for sure made me smile.
All right, thank you, Haley. We have Grace next.
Hi, everybody. And Kayla, your hair does look great. So I wish I could have seen the dance number. But hi, everybody. Nice to be with you today. So Grace Havlin, I'm a principal at BCG, where I work in the consumer products practice, and I get to combine my love of snack foods, problem solving, teamwork, and writing in bullet points, of course. So I guess what has made me smile recently is I live in New York City, and New York City, of course, through all of this, as many places, has had tough times, but it's been amazing to watch how New York City has been so resilient. You walk along the streets now, all the restaurants have all of their things outdoors, everybody's having a great time safely. And given where we were a couple of months ago, that always makes me smile.
Awesome. Molly?
Hey everyone, my name is Molly. I am a manager at Accenture Strategy out of our New York office, working primarily in growth strategy across a variety of different industries. Something that made me smile recently, I had the best shumai dumplings like I've ever had in my entire life. I don't know if anyone else eats them. I eat them like all the time from like so many different places, and I had literally the best ones. I went back and got another order. I was very happy. Made me smile.
Great stories all around. Lastly, we have Keisha.
Hi, I'm Keisha Bell. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I identify as a lesbian. I'm the managing director, head of diverse talent management at Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. Married to a crazy phys ed teacher for about 3 years. Something that made me smile recently is my dog Violet, who I was just talking about with a panelist, eats everything in this kind of craze. And I have a lot of grain allergies. And whenever I give her one of my gluten-free snacks, she invariably just spits it out on the floor. And she just did that. She's like, no, lady, I'm not eating that. So it made me smile.
Always great to hear a good dog story. So today it's all about just us women and leadership in the workplace. First question I would like to pose to our panelists is, what has your career journey been like as an LBT plus woman in particular? And how have you noticed the landscape change over the time that you've been working? First, I'd like to start off with Keisha.
The oldest, the one that's worked the longest. You know, I thought about this question, and I've answered this type of question before, and my answer is usually, you know, my queerness was neutralized by my Blackness, right? And I almost felt like my queerness was ancillary to my Blackness, because a lot of the challenges or a lot of the things that I experienced in financial services when I started 20 plus years ago, and it was primarily white and male. So my queerness, or my being a lesbian, was treated almost as an object of curiosity, and not, maybe not necessarily taken seriously, but it also, what it did was, you know, my Blackness made me not be the object of attention or desire from the mostly male environment I was in, so I could kind of fly under the radar a little bit. And I think that helped me. How the landscape has changed for my career is that I can look around in financial services and see more people that look like me. I mean, we have a Black lesbian running Joe Biden's campaign, right? I would not have seen that, did not see that 20 years ago. I did not see a lot of examples of me, and now I see more people who are like me, and I think that that's wonderful. I think it's great. That's how I would
I
answer
couldn't
it.
agree more.
Mm-hmm.
It's really great to look around and see people that you can relate to and just who you really feel a connection with, right? So you feel like you're not
Mm-hmm.
alone.
Mm-hmm.
Grace, would you like to take this next?
Yeah, of course, of course. So I started my professional career in Sydney about, I guess, 9 years ago now, and actually at a different consulting firm, but I think it's more the time than the firm that's made the difference. So I was in an office of about 200 people, so a pretty big office. There was a pride group, but there was two others as part of that group, one partner and, you know, the IT guy, both males. And it was just a very different experience than sort of we have today. I actually remember going to an event that was being set up that was trying to actually be something like a Romba or an Out for Undergrad, and they had invited, you know, a lot of very senior male mentors to mentor undergraduate kids, and the most senior female it seemed like they could find was me, and I was like a first year in consultant out of undergrad, and of course that was like a bit of a disappointing experience, and this is not that long ago in a country that's pretty accepting and liberal as well. And I think, you know, I can't believe how much this has all changed, that we have all of these events and forums. And I, of course, am lucky enough, and many of us are, to work at companies where you have people around you who are like you, and you have people who you can look up to and who look up to you. And I think every year it gets better, and I'm very excited about that.
Thank you so much. Molly?
Sure. So I guess for me, it's a little bit less of like how the landscape has shifted, I think, but more about like how I've shifted in my career. So I started my career about 10 years ago. I grew up in New York City, grew up in a very liberal environment, right? So being queer it didn't feel that different, right? And I was very lucky to like have that experience. But that being said, when I did sort of enter the workforce, I kept that part of my life very separate, right? And so even I worked in nonprofit, right? Like I worked in education, I worked with liberal people. It wasn't a question of politics or anything like that, but it was more of like where I was in my life, right? And how comfortable I felt and how not. So I did the whole thing where you like change pronouns, or like, you know, don't talk about the pronouns of like the person that you're with, right? And you're like, yeah, they, you know, all that stuff, right? Like I did all of that. I lied about people that I was with, all of that. And it wasn't actually until I went to business school that, and honestly, partly Ramba too, where it just became like it was like a sort of a fresh start. I was entering the corporate world, and it was just a chance to like really adopt that part of my identity into like who I am all the time, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's at home or wherever it is. So I've been really lucky in that, you know, my experience sort of at Accenture, which has been the only corporate work environment I've worked in, has obviously been very accepting, and we have pride ERGs and talk about it all the time, and it's great. It has been just, again, I think it's more of like my own personal shift rather than a landscape shift that I've seen.
I think you bring up a really interesting perspective. That is, each person has their own journey, and no two people's journey is alike, right? And that's why it's so important to have these conversations and talk with different people to learn how each person has gone through their own journey. And you never know, your journey might relate to someone else and make them feel more confident about their own. Kaylee, can you take it on next?
Yeah, I think my career journey also parallels my journey and how I've evolved in living in courage. I did not grow up in a liberal area. I actually grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is quite conservative. And my company prior to being with Discover actually fired me for being gay. And that was a pretty tough blow, but not super surprising. But as I kind of came out of that and came out more and more to myself, I've learned that the more I live in courage and take risks, the more opportunities kind of present themselves to me. And it wasn't really until I got transferred to our Chicago office that the world kind of opened up for me, with the diversity of thought and opinion and life and all the different backgrounds. I absolutely loved being in Chicago for that. And when I moved there, I had a mentor that thought they were doing the best for me, but they kind of coached me and said, hey, you're going to need to change the way that you dress, the way that you present yourself if you want to be taken serious. And I followed that advice. So I bought a whole new wardrobe. I wore super feminine clothes. I wore makeup, sort of, best that I could because I didn't know how. But when I finally was like, no, I'm not comfortable, I am not living authentically, and really started, putting pictures up of my family and dressing the way that I felt was right and standing kind of in my own queerness, that's when like opportunities started like literally coming at me. And I found this amazing courage, and I'm still evolving it, not gonna lie. It's still like definitely a path that I'm on, but that's kind of been how I've met that. And I think the landscape's changed to help with that too. So working for such an inclusive environment like Discover has really helped me to hone that and to find those places and take those risks and kind of play with what does it mean to be queer, to be female in the workplace, and how do I hold my own there?
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story. And I think we're all very proud of you for your journey. And it's awesome that you are where you are right now. So we've all kind of talked about a common thread in journeys, right? That is that the workplace is more inclusive now, which is amazing. So I would like to know, and I'm sure everyone here is also curious, how has each of your companies supported you for being a part of this community? Would you like to take us off, Grace?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm very lucky to work for a company like BCG and an industry like consulting, which is very inclusive in general. And I think that if I think about how work has supported me, there's a couple of ways that I think about it. There's of course all of the formal things that happen. So BCG has all sorts of conferences and local events and national events and all the rest of it. And there's a mentorship program, which I particularly have benefited from, both the mentors that I have and the mentees that I now have, who actually learn a lot from. So there's all of those formal things that are in place, but I think what has made the bigger difference for me is the smaller things, right? It's being able to openly talk with my teams and with the partners I work with about my life, about my wife, bring her to events, and it to be like nothing's different, right? And to have that support as well with clients. To know that if you're, thankfully consumer products is actually quite inclusive as well, but I know that there's people who work in mining and things like that where it's been a bit of more of a challenge. And I think just knowing that the company you work for has your back and is there for you, and it's not even a thing for this to be an issue at BCG it's been amazing. So I've always felt very supported every step on the way.
That's really great. What about you, Keisha?
I would just add to Grace, what Grace is describing is the inclusion part of it, the inclusion and the belonging, right? Your policies and your procedures and ERGs and all of that is wonderful, and making sure your benefits and everything align with being inclusive, but it's that feeling of belonging that it has to be genuine. And I've felt it at my company in a number of occasions But when I think when I was somewhat newer to this organization or newer in a role and just had been promoted and was under a new manager, and it was a woman, and I came out to her, as we all have to do all the time if someone doesn't know your backstory, and said to her, I was saying I was going on a weekend to a friend's wedding, and it was two women getting married. And like next week she came in with like wedding magazines and was like, I think you should wear this to this, and I hear this about lesbian. Like, she'd gone off and done research about gay marriage and lesbian weddings and come back to me with all of this information. And we sat down and this is a pretty senior person in the organization. There have been a number of occasions when I felt supported as well, like presenting to the board and having casual conversations with board members after, pretty senior people in financial services firms, and my CEO coming up, or chief of XYZ saying, how's your wife, right? And talking very openly about my wife. Those are the types of things that make you feel like you belong, right?
For sure, and I think inclusivity is becoming a higher priority in many firms now. And as an MBA student, I've been seeing in case competitions, diversity and inclusivity, that's the prompt for almost every single one. And that's just amazing. Kaylee, can you go next?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the Pride ERG at Discover is one of the strongest, most participated in, well-funded organization that we have for employee resource groups. And we have a Pride chapter in every single one of our locations. So I think that's a really great signal. We also have a lot of branding with that. And so one of the things that I've loved, especially being virtual lately, is we sent out a whole bunch of different like magnets and t-shirts and different kinds of paraphernalia, and getting on calls, especially with like senior leaders, and seeing our Pride logo in their workspace is a really great way for me to just, again, show up more courageously. Like, okay, I've got an ally here. I don't need to be on guard or watch what I say or do, and I can talk about my wife and my kid. And so I think that's a really great signal for the organization. We also have amazing benefits. So as we were doing our family planning, we had our IVF therapy covered as part of our insurance. And it's not perfect, but it helped. And knowing that the company supported that. And then we have amazing parental leave for when the kiddo does come, also for adoption. And so those different ways and it's available for all of us. So female, male, queer, you name it. And I think that's a really great opportunity too, to really show that all families are different and need that support. I also had a really amazing experience. One of our senior leaders in our HR department, who was our lead over the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office at the time, had an opportunity to sit down and talk to him. And at the time, all of our Pride branding had LGBT. And I got to speak with him and say, hey, I'd love to add the Q, because that's my gender identity. I identify as queer in both my gender and my sexuality. And he took the time to sit down and say, well, help me understand why. What does that mean? One. And two, what does that mean to you? Why? He basically asked, like, why should I care? But in a very humble way. And so being able to have that conversation with him on what queer means, how not having it as part of our branding impacted me. And within 2 weeks, all the branding had changed. So that was a really powerful, I think, another example of how, number one, telling our stories really matters, and being listened to and having, again, the courage to speak up, but having a company that really supports that and is willing to listen and make change.
I love that you brought that up. It's really, I would say a problematic kind of a sensitive topic, right? Where it's not right to shoot people down when they ask you questions, right? When people are willing to listen, it's okay to have conversation as long as they're being open-minded. And I'm so glad that your workplace had that for you. Lastly, we have Molly.
So just echoing a lot of what folks have said, right? So we have a really strong Pride ERG. There's a lot of formal networks, informal channels, and we have a conference that happens every year. I think one thing in particular about the conference that's awesome is that it's global. So it's from all our different offices. And we have like there's like one part of the conference where you hear from folks who are like leaders of the Pride ERGs from different places, and so hearing about like the experiences of someone in the London office versus someone in the Sao Paulo office versus someone in the Manila office, right? There's such a variety of different experiences, both sort of in the context of like working at Accenture, right, but also just in the context of their societies and where they are in terms of LGBTQ inclusivity. And so that opportunity to learn from other folks and having those people come to, you know, where we have this conference and feel supported by people globally, I think was really impactful, I think, all around. The other thing I will say is that I think representation matters in leadership. And so I've been really fortunate in that, you know, post MBA, I come in and I join a consulting development program. It's a 2-year program where before you sort of formally align, and it's, you know, part of that 2-year up or out moment, right, that happens in consulting. The head of that program and also the head of the analyst program is an out queer man. And so, and he's very much a part of like your sort of first 2 years at Accenture, whether queer or not, right? And so I think it's just such an important experience to like know that the person that sort of essentially was the person that I was accountable to for the next years was in a part of my community, and it didn't feel like, oh, now I have to like feel weird about this or anything. It was just like very normalized. And that was pretty exciting to see.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. This next question that we have was particularly requested by our panelists, and I'm really excited for this one. So Grace and Keisha, this question is for both of you. How has being an LGBT plus woman been a positive experience and a source of resiliency? So I'd like to start with Keisha, and I'm sure you have some great stories to share.
It's actually, I think, kind of succinct, right? When I grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. I'm a native New Yorker. And my family is from the South, very conservative, not necessarily religious, but my dad was super homophobic and my mother was homophobic by proxy because she was just unaware. She was like, I don't know any gay people. So coming out to them, however many decades ago, was a challenge. And I knew, at first I identified as bisexual, and then I said, you know, for me, that was a bus ride to lesbian. It was easier for me to say that than to tell them I was a lesbian. So when I finally did come out to them, very much the fear of rejection was there. And as a matter of fact, my father did reject me. My mother was like, that's my child. I love her. I don't understand this. I don't know what's going on, blah, blah, blah. But my father was like, I don't want to have a relationship with you. And the woman you're with is who turned you gay, you know, the whole drama around that, right? And so my dad and I didn't have a relationship for a number of years. And I could have easily adjusted, right? What he wanted me to do was to be straight. He wanted me to not see this woman, not have a girlfriend. And I was resolute in the fact that I wasn't going to do that, right? I was like, no, I was so happy. And finally I had solved the puzzle of what was happening in my heart and my mind, right? And I wasn't going to go back in the closet for anybody. So taking a stand against someone who I loved, right? And whose affirmations I needed kind of carried me through some of the more difficult things in corporate America. And it gave me a sense of bravery that sometimes I can't even, I know that's where it comes from, but it's from somewhere deep within. I am not risk averse. I am not afraid to speak up. I am not afraid to stand in my truth. I am not afraid to tell people who I am. I am not afraid to say that's wrong. This is the right way to do it. And this is how I want it done. Because at every turn, as a queer person, as a gay person, as a lesbian, all of us have that risk in our lives of that rejection. And I want us to take it, instead of letting it get us down, turn it inward and make us a bit stronger. And I use that to fuel how I move through the corporate world. That's how it's made me resilient.
That's amazing, and such an amazing story. For me, I think this is such an important question, because I think as a group, and sometimes even at these conferences, I think we do a great job of talking about the barriers, what's been hard for us, why sometimes being LBT or queer is tough, right? But I think, and that's all true, and I'm so glad that we talk about it, and we should continue to talk about it. But I think that there is a whole other side of this as well, the positive side of this that we should talk about too, right? Like, this is not all negative. And I think for me, I know this isn't true for everybody, and I'm very lucky in my circumstance and where I work and all the rest of it. But I have really found that, especially in the last sort of 5 years, being an LBT woman has been like has been an advantage for me, right? Because I have access to this wonderful network of people and all the infrastructure that we've talked about before that somebody who is not part of Pride at BCG does not. And it's been such a wonderful experience and really an advantage. I've also found that having something about yourself and being open about it encourages, it kind of makes you vulnerable, right? In a way, if you come out to somebody, with your clients, with the people that you work with, whatever else, it makes you vulnerable and you open. And what I've found is that makes other people more likely to be vulnerable and to be open. So it's not necessarily about the same thing, right? It could be about anything. But if I mention my wife, they're kind of like, oh, this person's sort of sharing a part of themselves with me. And I find that that's often reciprocated. And you can build it's sort of an avenue to build a more authentic connection sometimes. And so, you know, for me, it's been a wonderful experience. And let's keep talking about the bad things, but it's not all. There's so much upside of being part of this wonderful community.
That is such a powerful message, and something that, you're right, everyone overlooks. And I'm so glad that we were able to talk about that in this particular panel. My last and final prepared question is for Kaylee and Molly. What piece of advice would you give to our audience on navigating, their professional lives as LGBTQ+ women? Kaylee, would you like to start?
Sure. I would say live in love. Love as the word, and in the workplace, I think can be and feel a little bit taboo. But I would love to normalize it, especially among, our queer and female peers. Lift each other up, find the spaces to support each other, make sure that you're making that space. With all the racial tensions, and as I've kind of been studying and learning more about my own biases, a really good friend of mine sent me this amazing video, and it's the coach who's got everybody on the starting line, and he asks a series of questions. If you have two parents, step forward. If you have, if you've had access to education, step forward. If your parents are still married, step forward. And he asks this series, and it completely separates this group of students. And it's this idea of we all have different starting lines. And I think that's true of those of us who are a different race, those of us who are different in gender, those of us who have different sexualities. So understanding where you are with your own privilege is so powerful. And, taking time to turn around and realize, hey, there are people behind me that don't have the same starting line as me. So how do I love them? How do I reach out, pull them forward, find a way so that more and more of us have access to that opportunity and that equity. So yeah, live out loud, live in love, find those places to truly find those connections and love each other. Because I think, at least in my personal experience, the more that I've been able to access that and love the people that I work with, again, it just opens more doors. And I think love is one of the most courageous things that we can do.
That's hard Hello, Kaylee. That was great. I think I agree with you a lot of what you said. I think I want to speak a little bit specifically to B School because I know a lot of you guys are first and or mostly first years, I would assume, in this room, but some second years as well. You're going to enter B School and all of a sudden you're going to be like one of a small amount of people, right? And it's going to feel like a burden sometimes, but like I have to represent this and who I am. There's going to be people who are envious of the, opportunities that you get, right? Like through Ramba and through this experience. And I just, it's like drown out what those people are saying, right? Like that's my biggest piece of advice because someone said it best. I didn't say this. It was when I was a second year or first year said this. She was like, this is the first time that anyone has ever like wanted to hire me because of who I am. And it's like, whoa, like that's so different, right? And so you should own that and you should be proud of that. And you shouldn't make anyone feel like you don't deserve that in any kind of way. The other thing is to Kaylee's point just about, supporting other people, right? So like thinking about all the business school like clubs you're going to get involved in, and supporting the minority students, supporting the women's clubs, supporting international students, right? Like it's B School was a very different experience for me in terms of like who I was surrounded by, right? Like it can feel a bit one note at times. And so your differences feel like that much more different than everyone else. And so making sure that you are lending support to everyone else who feels those differences. And together you're sort of actually like bigger than everyone else, right? In numbers. So those are my pieces of advice as you go through business school.
Thank you all. We're now opening the floor up to you guys. You guys can add in questions in the chat. I've already started receiving a few. And just a quick reminder to do the poll on the Pathable platform if you have not already, because right after this, we'll be doing our breakout rooms. So the first question I have here is from Maggie. And she says, I'd really love to hear panelists' thoughts on the fine line between being fierce and unapologetic versus being professional. I'm just learning to deal with that line myself as a new MBA student and feel like that maybe there's no binary between the two. And she's super interested to hear the thoughts of the leaders here. Does anyone want to take that up first? I think it's a really great question.
I can start. A lot of times when I talked before about my queerness, and I'm sorry, I use my hands, I'm from Brooklyn. My queerness being ancillary to my Blackness, a lot of times Black women are accused of being aggressive in the workplace or outspoken, et cetera, right? The norms that exist in corporate America, some of us will fit in nicely to them, and some of us will not. My advice would be learn what some of those norms are, but always be yourself. Learn what those, from Brooklyn, I would speak in a completely different way in corporate America. I would be like, you need to sit down, you need to shut up, blah, blah, blah. But I can't do that because that's not the norm in the workplace. So I found a way to be my authentic self, right? Still be fierce, but still fit into the norm or the culture of that workplace without sacrificing who I am. It's a balancing act.
Can I jump on that? So Keisha, I'm also from Brooklyn, right? And I'm from, right? But like people will respond to me differently than they will to you, right? And like, that's the reality of the situation.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, it's really understanding who you are in like the context of this, but also I do think you need to push the needle, right? Like you can't like hide who you are. And making people uncomfortable is important, right? Like, because that's the only way that they're going to grow. So yes, I agree. I mean, I will just tell you guys, like my last performance review, I got called aggressive by my manager, right? It happened. I still got promoted. It's whatever, like, I don't know. Like, I think I felt more comfortable in corporate America than I actually have in nonprofit, to be honest with this, in terms of like being able to be more of my authentic self. The other thing I'll say is, I just lost the train of thought. It'll come back to me. But just be yourself, but like understand what it's like. Oh, business school is a great place to like fail and like screw up and like test things. That's the other thing. Like you have 2 years to like explore, and you know and nobody's like holding your degree away from you, right? Like, so take those 2 years to sort of feel like, what can I do, and how much can I push the needle? It's a good barometer for what the workplace will look like.
Great, thank you both. Our next question is from Ilsa. I hope I'm saying that right. She says, I'm a pre-MBA and have a young child with my wife. Sorry. Any of the panelists or attendees have advice for managing the MBA experience when many of my classmates may not have caretaking responsibilities? Who wants to take this one?
So I can answer not from the perspective of being an MBA student, but having a very full, demanding schedule and managing parenting responsibilities while also, you know, trying to maintain everything else that we have going on. I think the biggest thing is give yourself grace. Realize that you are doing the best you can with the situation. Nobody asked for this. And also being super transparent. I think the one thing that, as I've managed that with a full-time demanding schedule, is just being upfront and being like, hey, here's the reality of the situation. I'm not completely present. I'm managing a toddler at the same time as trying to, you know, be successful here. Having a schedule is also really important. And I think you also kind of mentioned where maybe some of your classmates aren't in the same place. I think that's even more, at least in my perspective, place to like kind of draw your boundaries and be super clear about what you're dealing with. I think that's some of what we don't want to cause assumptions in, that, you know, you're not fulfilling your part, or and also for yourself, to make sure that you're transparent with what you're dealing with and asking for what you need, because if you don't ask for that, nobody else will. And you can't take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself too.
Thank you, Haley. I think we have time for just 1 or 2 more questions, because I do want to get to our breakout, so we have a bit of time to talk. This question is from Eliza. I'm finding myself overwhelmed since starting my MBAs by all the ways the MBA and the business world could be more inclusive, equitable, diverse, etc. How do you pick your battles to channel your energy wisely?
It's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good question that I don't think any of us have the answers to. I think it's a constant battle, right? And I think one of the things that's been great about my experience at Accenture has been, I've been able to find ways to sort of explore the issues that I feel like exist in the world in my project work, right? So like I've done a lot of work with our nonprofit practice, our pro bono practice, and addressing sort of systemic issues of inequality and racism through those, and also with internal initiatives at Accenture. And so I found it, I'm able, because of like all the resources that working at a big company has, I've found the ability to sort of like channel my energy into like some really cool projects that I'm working on. So that's one of the things that I've tried to do as much as I can.
Yeah, and I think just to think about the question in a slightly different way as well, I think some of it is realizing that you do not need to do it all yourself, right? So I think that you can pick the ones that, a combination of that you care most about, and you think that you have the most ability to impact, but your support of other people who are supporting things that you care about, being visible in that support, also goes a long way. So I think it's not, you have to pick a couple. You probably could pick a couple to spend your time on, but you can pick as many as you want to show your support for.
All right, thank you guys. Our next question is from Rebecca. From your perspective, how does the idea of self-worth impact women in business, and how do you support that in others?
I can start. I suffered from this when I first started out my career. At any point, you can feel a bit insecure. You don't have the right answers, or you don't have all the answers, and women put a lot of pressure on themselves. I think I've learned to push myself and to ask questions even when I think it might not be received well. But I also try to, when I see women struggling with that, because there's almost this look that I can see, or I can see sometimes we hold ourselves back. I will consciously call on that person. So and so, what do you have to say? Right? How can I support you? Also, at my company, I think I probably mentor about 25, 30 women. I don't have the time to do it, but it's my responsibility for where I am to reach back and share my experiences with those women so they know that they're not alone. They understand I've gone through it and I survived and I'm just okay. Because sometimes when you're in the moment of something, it's so overwhelming, you just don't think you can get through it. I think, that's innate to me, and that's what we all should be doing once we ascend to wherever we're trying to get to. That's a long, rambling answer, but
I completely agree. And I mean, I think self-worth is so important, and it's difficult, right? Because it's a thing that shows up in your professional career, but of course there's so much more to your self-worth and yourself than who you are at work. I think what's really important, and I have found helped me a lot, and I try to pass down too, is providing people and seeking very specific positive feedback, right? Because everybody gets negative feedback, as you do at work, right? And some people who are naturally more confident will be like, oh yeah, but cool, but I do all these other things better. People who naturally don't have that sense of self-worth will get that negative feedback and really grab onto it, and that can really create kind of a negative cycle with performance. So I think that giving and seeking, when you start your job, specific, if someone says great job, say, oh great, well, what do you think was particularly effective about that? I'd love to keep building on that. Like, you got to learn the way to ask it, but I think that making sure you get specific positive feedback really makes a big difference.
I think too, like, realize your body position and where you're placing yourself. I had a habit of staying in the back of the room or in the corners or not sitting at the table. And I'm an introvert by nature, and I'm a huge people pleaser, so I want kind of everybody else to go first. And I realized I wasn't doing myself any favors that way. And so as much as possible, I try to be at the table, sit towards the front, be close to the people who are making the decisions, who I admire, who I want to learn more from. So being super aware of like where you're placing yourself in the room, your body language too. Like if the superhero pose or the power pose, like if we as women tend to kind of shrink and try to stay small and like, lean forward, open up your shoulders, be present. I also like, especially if it's confrontational in a way, having my palms open. It's a whole lot harder to be angry or tense if your palms are open versus I tend to like kind of be in a fist. So really kind of be aware of your body and how you're positioning it, the kind of body language that you're exhibiting. Because that I think is another indication of how you are showing up as worthy to be in the room, to be the one working side by side with anybody else.
Just to add to that, I think especially if any of you guys are interested in consulting, right? Like you can show up to a client on day one and it's a client in an industry you've never worked in, you have no familiarity with, right? And so it's this sort of exercise in sort of like faking it until you make it, right? And you're supposed to be like their trusted advisor. And so there's this sort of element of like, I have to like project an unbelievable amount of confidence from like day one, just from the nature of the industry. And so that I think has really helped sort of just me and sort of filtered into other parts of my life. The other thing I'll say, and I ordinarily wouldn't say this, but like this is a great community and I love Rumba and all that, but like someone once told me, like, have the confidence of a mediocre white man, and it just like radically changed like my opinion of like, oh, okay, that's right. Like, and it's just always in my head now. Any moment when I'm like, oh, that's right.
I love that.
Such a great note to end on. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you, everyone. Now, we're going to facilitate breakout rooms to carry on a conversation on a topic chosen by you guys in the poll. I see that building your professional identity as an LBT plus woman has won by a large margin. So that will be the topic for the breakout rooms. And we only have about 13 minutes left in this session, so you will probably all be leaving this session after the breakout rooms directly. I hope you guys use this as an opportunity to just start the conversation and that it doesn't stop here. I would encourage all of you to continue talking about these things and just spreading awareness even outside our session. So I will be opening up breakout rooms now.
So I'm dividing us into 4 groups, and you will see the breakout pop up very soon.
I hope you all had a great conversation. Hi, everyone. It seems that we have been given a little bit of extra time. That's amazing. I hope, how did all of your conversations go? You can just put it in the chat. I know it was a very short time, but I hope you guys were able to share some great stories and possibly make some connections that you will walk out of here with. Thank you so much for joining. I wish you guys a great rest of the Ramba conference. And well, that's it. That's about it. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna end this meeting.
End the recording.
I think it. Oh, did it stop? Oh, it hasn't stopped yet. Okay.
All right, great.